Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And it basically, I think, helps us to focus the mind about why we're here. We're trying to expand opportunity. And we have an example of what happens when we do it well, when we do it right. And so we just have to do more of it. I'm Shirley Malcolm, but this time I am actually Shirley Malcolm from AAAS. It's like, okay, which Shirley Malcolm are we dealing with? And this panel is going to try to get real. You know, to a large extent, when we are talking about strategies and things like this, it seems so at a distance. That's why I was happy to have Jason here, because she makes it real in terms of where we're trying to go. But we start with ideas, okay, and we somehow have to make it real, okay? And so I am going to ask our panel to just kind of give us like a 5-minute highlight each about the kinds of program, the kinds of effort that you're undertaking on the ground to make everything kind of come together and especially how the kind of HBCU connection, the higher ed connection with regard to this. I want to start by by reminding us of a story, okay? As a children's story, I don't know if all of you remember it, but when the mice in the house decided that something had to be done about the cat. The cat had gotten totally out of control, okay? And so they had a convening, and they came together in their convening. And their biggest idea was, you know, we need to know when the cat is coming, because the cat is sneaky. And the basic idea of when somebody came up with a great idea of the convening, okay, that if you put a bell around the cat's neck, that you would always have enough time to be able to respond and get out of the cat's way, all right? Because the mice are faster, all right? But you gotta know that the cat is coming. And then the little mouse in the back of the room raised their hand and said, "Who will bell the cat?" And I think that in so many cases, what we're talking about is, we know that there are things that need to be done. It's not always clear how we get there. And the other thing I would remind us is that I actually went to AAAS the first time in 1975. I heard the discussion had come up to develop an inventory of programs in science that had been undertaken to bring more people from minoritized populations into the sciences and engineering and medical fields. A few years later, we looked at the same kinds of programs that had been brought online to bring women in. Okay, what's different? What's going to be different this time? You know, what about all the things that we've been talking about is going to be different? But in the meantime, we start from where we are, okay? And so, Latonya, you want to kick us off, give us 2 sentences of who you are, and then tell us about what you're doing.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Latonya Brown Robertson. I'm currently at Howard University. I'm a professor of economics, and I'm the director of the honors program at Howard University. Yeah, HU in the back, okay. I actually am here in the capacity of my experience at Bowie State University. I was at Bowie State University for 17 years, and I helped to establish the Data Science and Analytics Initiative at Bowie State. And then while I was at Bowie State University during COVID, I met Miss Talitha Washington from the Atlanta University Center, and her and I had—
the rest they say is history.
Yes, exactly. So we became friends, and then next thing you know, we have an NSF Includes grant that establishes the National Data Science Alliance, which moves together all 101 HBCUs to work together to expand data science curriculum, engagement amongst faculty members as well as research. So I'm in charge of the Northeastern Regional Hub. So to Dr. Washington sends her love. She's at a W.E.B. Du Bois event today at Clark, Atlanta. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, you are at Clark, Atlanta, because you are here with us, and we appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay, but here is an opportunity that we see of a one kind of partnership, and that is just basically putting the capacity in data science all together in such a way that you can begin to build something that can have real force in terms of talking, in terms of the development of this whole area, and looking at the HBCUs as being a place to come together and be able to talk very differently about the whole area of data science. Terrific. And Carol, we go back. I'm not going to say how long we go back, okay? But Carol O'Donnell, I mean, is legendary in terms, thank you for all your work that you have been doing. But, you know, please give everybody a kind of a sense of what you're undertaking now in terms of building these partnerships and making these pieces come together.
Yeah, so it's great to see you. And how much we've learned from Dr. Malcolm over the years. So can we have a hand for Dr. Malcolm? So at the Smithsonian Institution, it's interesting because I'm here, we're talking about the roles of institutions of higher education, but I'm here representing K through 12, and so in STEM education. So the question is like, why? And I heard it repeatedly in our breakout session about the importance of this alignment that needs to happen between what happens in K through 12 STEM education with that extra M, and being explicit about that extra M, what happens in undergraduate, community colleges, undergraduate, graduate education, and of course, you cannot talk about STEM education without talking about STEM workforce. And by the way, when we say STEM workforce, let's always include STEM education, STEM teachers in that workforce, because I think that, unfortunately, we don't talk about teachers enough in grades K through 12 when we're talking about the importance of the STEM workforce. So for the Smithsonian Science Education Center, an organization within the Smithsonian that is not a museum, it's not a research center, it's an education center that's an outreach center. And our Secretary Lonnie Bunch, who has committed his entire, he won't tell us, but it's probably 35 plus years in the field, committed to education and history and culture, has recognized that diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusion is important. And so in 2015, the Smithsonian Science Education Center began to think about what could we do to help school districts and state education agencies and schools diversify the STEM teaching workforce. And that seems like an odd thing for the Smithsonian to do, but the Smithsonian cares deeply about making certain that it's serving all youth across the globe, across the nation as well. And to do that, we recognize that the research said that the teaching population in K through 12 does not look at all like the student population. And that, as we all know, in 2014, that really began to shift. There was no longer a white majority in our student population. And yet our teaching population in K through 12 remains to be predominantly white female, around 79 to 80%. So we understood that if we were going to help to solve the more complex problem of diversifying the STEM workforce and to make certain that more people were going into college wanting to major in STEM, that we had to help educators in K through 12 ensure that students felt like they belonged in that classroom and that they saw STEM as accessible to them. So we started to partner with historically black colleges and universities, including our own colleagues at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and started to host these summits, in which we were bringing together, at no cost, of course, to these schools, school districts, state education agencies, teams that came together to map out their own action plan, as you just saw in your breakout rooms, to understand what is it that they needed to do as an individual activity system to make a difference in their own individual communities. So, like you just mentioned, thank goodness for NSF Includes, because it really has, as a funding opportunity, has made a difference in addressing problems like this. And so we were able to get an NSF Includes planning grant to begin to bring these teams together to think about how to shift theory into practice. Talk more about that later, but that's kind of the high level work that I think is most applicable to this convening.
Thank you. One of the real challenges in all of this, I don't know if I mentioned that, when I started that work at AAAS in 1975, looking at pre-college programs, it was largely because we did not have control over K-12 education. And so the question is, how can one actually move systems over which one has very little control? One area is, in fact, the people who are prepared to teach. And that's a big issue. And that is, how do we prepare them? Who do we attract? Because this initiative is interested in pre-K through whatever. And so this role of being able to bring along a whole cadre of people who are deeply not just committed, but knowledgeable as teachers who can then be able to be in the classroom with the kind of confidence, et cetera. It's a major area, and I think that it's an area where there's probably a lot of room for HBCUs to step in and start to fill in some of that space. And I can assume that we will be having these kinds of conversations over the next convenings as we begin to try to kind of put together, what did we learn here? How does it affect what we're going to think about later, et cetera? Because later also includes the way that we would maybe think differently about things that can augment systems that we aren't necessarily think of working the way that we need them to work yet. Okay. Gabriella, okay. I love the title, The New Center.
Yeah.
Okay. Gabriella Waters, you want to introduce yourself and your new center, because I'm thrilled.
Sure, I'm Gabriella Waters, and I have the unique distinction of being double Morgan because I work here at the Center for Equitable AI and Machine Learning Systems, and I'm also an alumna of Morgan State University. So I'm always happy to throw that little note in there because I'm kind of Morgan made, so I understand some of what it's like in the challenges of HBCU students may face as they try to navigate post-secondary education. The Center for Equitable AI, as it says, we are interested in how we can redress and mitigate bias in artificial intelligence systems and machine learning algorithms. And we are in a unique position because, we're talking higher ed here and we're talking K through 12 here. Well, I'm talking to you at this point from the moment you take your first breath until you take your last. And so this technology doesn't care what industry you're in, what major you have, every single person is impacted by it. And so we're looking at that because machine learning is so good at amplifying what the input was. And if the input is biased, it's only going to be amplified. And so we are looking at that through research and how we can fix these systems, how we can clean data, how we look at what data we feed these systems to make sure it's appropriate. Facial recognition has been in the news for these issues. Sinks that have sensors that can't sense darker skin tones has been in the news for these issues. Insurance companies have been in the news for these issues where people are being denied procedures because they have a certain BMI or a certain family history that says, well, I know you need this heart surgery, but we'll give you laparoscopic lap band first, and then you can get a heart surgery, when it doesn't really make any sense, but the system information is biased that has been fed into it, and it's making biased decisions. there is no part of your life that is not touched by artificial intelligence. And so at this point in our lives, we have a line of demarcation where it's pre-artificial intelligence and it's the rest of your life. And so now we're at that line where it's in the rest of your life. And we need to make sure we're being responsible in how we develop and deploy these systems, as well as how we shape them for the future. And my own personal thing that I have to add in there is that I'm also interested in the conversation around neurodiversity and artificial intelligence, because they are largely left out of the conversation in terms of how these systems can be used to enhance the talents that they already have, or to even be considered as part of the population that interfaces with these technologies as a whole. So I like to research that line because I'm also a researcher at the center, and I also educate the communities on what artificial intelligence is. There's another line where before this line people think that artificial intelligence is war games. Then there's another line where people think artificial intelligence is the Terminator. And then there's another line where people think artificial intelligence is R2-D2. So all of these aren't quite right, but I like to give these examples and educate people, because the line between where we are right now, which is called artificial narrow intelligence, and where war games and Terminator and R2-D2 are, it's like the distance between our sun and the galaxy of Andromeda. So we're not going to be there in our lifetime. So computers, artificial intelligence, they don't think. And that's part of the challenge, because we tell them what to think. And that's why the bias is there. So that's why we do what we do.
That's exciting.
It is very exciting.
I mean, it really does touch us all, because, you know, we've been talking about facial recognition technology, self-driving cars, guess who they hit. I mean, there are lots of aspects that are kind of sitting here that we all need to kind of consider as we are taking this. But we need to build the pool of people who are doing this work. We need to fix the institutions that may be using this stuff. But we also have to fix the knowledge about how this is all working with us or not. Okay, so you two are really seriously or potentially seriously connected.
Oh, we've always been connected.
And you two are seriously potentially connected, because there is, the question is the teachers who are coming along, you know, how are they going to kind of become acquainted with all of this stuff? And one of the questions that I had, I know we need to end the panel, but I did want to raise this, you know, like when all of a sudden when the pandemic hit and we all moved into a virtual space, all of a sudden the technology was there, but we hadn't really prepared the teachers to spend their time operating in those kinds of environments. So how do we begin to kind of think about not just what we've been through, but imagining the world where the technology becomes an augmented, not reality, but an augmented space where we can in fact enhance the educational opportunities?
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things I think we fail at in the K through 12 space is that we're not giving our students enough opportunities to think about these complex topics, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, data science, and we're also not making it meaningful to them. And so when we think about, for example, data science, getting students to recognize data from their own community to answer meaningful questions that make a difference to them helps them recognize the importance of data and to trust data. And then I think the other thing that we fail to do, but the Smithsonian and others are trying to do, is also give students an opportunity to see the incredible range of individuals who work in this field, including the folks on this panel, and to recognize that there are many different entry points into a particular field. It doesn't have to necessarily just be a scientist, as they traditionally are taught. but to hear from those individuals, to hear their personal stories, to connect with them in terms of their identity. And those are, I think, the kinds of opportunities that we have to integrate that social science side of things into the teaching of STEM that most of our STEM teachers just don't take the time to do. So.
One thing that I found to be really helpful that I actually implemented at Bowie State University was a faculty learning community. And our main rule was to have a safe space for our faculty members where they can come in saying, hey, you know what? I really don't completely understand how data science and analytics works in my discipline. And how is that information being translated from my discipline into this common knowledge? So it's a learning process and a learning gap that's there even on the higher ed level, where everybody has to kind of come to a translation of what these terms are, what this understanding is, and be okay with being not understanding it, but working together to create those spaces to evolve that. So once we created that, then it was an openness for all of us to start creating and innovating and everything. But we started off with a safe space by saying, you know what, even though we have all of us have PhDs in this room, there are some things that we don't know, or some things that we don't understand. So let's try to learn them and come together to understand them.
Okay, so you're turning these, quote unquote, this big idea of all these data scientists into real people.
Right.
Okay, who are asking real questions about the work that they're doing.
And I think part of it is context
it's got to
too.
be equitable.
Yeah, and it's context. So when I'm teaching a machine learning algorithm to recognize the difference between a cat and a dog, I don't put a cat on the surface of the sun. I put a cat next to a ball of yarn and I say, this is a cat. The ball of yarn is the context. I give the dog a bone and I say, this is a dog. The bone is the context. And I think as we get higher and higher into a particular discipline, we start to forget that we have to make context for the issues that we're trying to address. And because I am making curricula for K through 12 and for higher education, the kind of context matters. What a kindergartner perceives as meaningful and important is going to be different than what a senior perceives or a postdoc perceives. And so I need different contexts for different levels. And I think that's what the artificial intelligence can remind us of. We all had to start with some sort of context. Our environment as humans has always been augmented. We're the kings and queens of augmenting our environment. We want it to be warm, so we have fire. We want it to be warm, we have clothes. We wanted to eat regularly. We started growing food. We have augmented our systems, our ecosystems throughout our existence. So the kinds of augments have changed as we've evolved. So we already know that we're going to always have something augmented. But how we explain cultural augmentations is where we start to look at how we start to develop those biases and where they derive from. But we always need context. So the challenge for me is sometimes when I see people in the post-secondary education world or, navigating that space and they come into a different cultural context, they don't have anything to tie it into. And so they're still operating with, this is my modus operandi and everything's got to fall in line with this. And it creates this point of tension where the knowledge can't really transfer because the friction between the cultural competencies is too great. And I think that's an opportunity that we can latch onto, is giving context to the experiences and the learning and the knowledge and the transfer of that knowledge.
And can I just say that what you just described, Dr. Walters, is exactly, we have to start introducing that kind of integration of those social systems into the teaching of STEM earlier, so that by the time they get to that adult learner, they're not afraid to do it. And it seems like that's what you're doing. So I commend you, because I think sometimes at the Smithsonian Science Education Center we get pushback from the field because we're taking a stance in which we believe that history, art, and culture should be integrated into the teaching of science, the teaching of STEM, because culture matters or context matters. So anyway, I just appreciate what you're doing.
Well, I want to thank my panel. I know that we are We are closing in on the ending time, but this is the end of the beginning. This is not the end, okay? Because we're gonna be having, as I said, more of these good meetings. And I just want to end with the notion of all of you are talking about the whole question about contextualizing what it is that we're about here, and helping people understand why we're doing what we're doing, and why it is actually important in their lives. And that is absolutely critical. I want to thank you all for doing that. And I want to repeat a quote that I heard from Jim Garrett on yesterday at CMU. Jim is the provost at Carnegie Mellon. And he was talking about an example of equity. He says, well, you're talking about where it is baked in, not bolted on. That it has to be there from the beginning. And it has to be a part of the design, the way that we think about it from the beginning. And I think that that's really what we're talking about here. And that is, how do we create a situation where in the STEM, the equity is baked in, not bolted on. So thank you so much.